Every mystery leaves a trail. Every trail hides a secret. Welcome to the Mystery Threshold.
Belle did all the flying. Had to. I was just baggage, like a sack of potatoes. Maybe someday I'll try it alone. You know, that was Amelia Earhart back in 1928, talking to the press right after she became the first woman to cross the Atlantic by air. And at the time, yeah, she was just a passenger. But that fierce ambition you hear in that quote, that absolute burning desire to grab the controls and push human endurance to its very limits, that's exactly what defined her. And tragically, it's also exactly what led her straight into the absolute greatest unsolved mystery in aviation history. Welcome to The Explainer. I'm your host, and today we are doing a complete forensic breakdown of a story you probably think you know, but honestly, you probably don't. We're going to dig deep into the actual communication logs, the deep-sea search data, and the enduring theories around Amelia Earhart's disappearance. Okay, let's dive right in. We're actually skipping the usual agenda today because there is literally only one question that matters for this explainer. What really happened in the skies over the Pacific Ocean on July 2nd, 1937? How does the most famous female aviator on the planet, flying a heavily modified Lockheed Electra, basically a flying laboratory, how does she just vanish without a trace? To really wrap our heads around the magnitude of this mystery, we have to understand her undeniable expertise. Earhart wasn't just a celebrity, right? She was a highly capable, incredibly skilled pioneer. 1928, first female passenger across the Atlantic. By 1932, she's the first woman to fly it solo and non-stop. Fast forward to 1935, she's the very first aviator, male or female, to fly solo from Honolulu to Oakland. She was an absolute master of the skies. And that's exactly what makes her final flight so incredibly baffling. I mean, her signature wasn't just a name, it was a global brand. By 1937, the Queen of the Air was endorsing products, designing clothes, breaking massive barriers for women everywhere. Contrast that massive public adulation, that roaring crowd, with the vast, isolated, and frankly terrifying emptiness of the Pacific Ocean, which is exactly where she and her navigator, Fred Noonan, found themselves on July 2nd. Section 1. Destination, Howland Island. The communications breakdown. Okay, so Earhart and Noonan departed Lae, New Guinea, heading for Howland Island. This place is a tiny, flat sliver of land just 6,500 feet long, barely 10 feet above the water, and it's over 2,500 miles away. Waiting for her there was the Coast Guard cutter Itasca. Their job was to provide radio and navigation support. But right out of the gate, there was a fatal error, a massive mismatch in timekeeping. Earhart and the Itasca planned their whole communication schedule using completely different time systems. Earhart was going by Greenwich Civil Time, but the Itasca was using a naval time zone designation. So what does that actually mean? It means their schedules were set a half hour apart. Literally, when Earhart was listening, the Itasca wasn't transmitting, and when the Itasca was listening, Earhart wasn't transmitting. And that just built into this catastrophic domino effect of technical failures. Earhart was transmitting her voice on 3105 kilohertz, but the radio operators on the Itasca suddenly realized their radio direction finder, their RDF, couldn't even tune into that specific signal to get a bearing on her location. Plus, Earhart's plane had this brand new Bendix receiver system installed, but her only training on it was a super brief introduction back at the factory. And to make matters even worse, a blown fuse during an earlier stop in Darwin had completely compromised her own RDF equipment. So let's map out the frantic radio logs from that morning, because it is tense. 2:45 a.m., the Itasca gets a routine cloudy weather report. Totally normal. But by 6:14 a.m., the tension is just skyrocketing. Earhart estimates she's about 200 miles away, and she actually starts whistling into the microphone. She's desperately trying to give the Itasca a continuous signal so they can track her. Down below on the ship, the radio man, Leo Bellarts, later said he was, quote, sitting there sweating blood because their equipment just could not tune in to help her. By 6:45 a.m., she estimates she's just 100 miles out. And then, the Itasca's radio log records this absolutely chilling transmission at 7:30 a.m. Half hour of fuel remaining. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. They've been flying for nearly 20 hours. They are completely lost over the vast open ocean. The fuel gauges are tapping zero, and they cannot lock onto the ship's signal. Which brings us to the final confirmed transmission. At 7:58 a.m., Earhart's voice cuts through the static one last time. She says she cannot hear the Itasca and begs them to send voice signals so she can take a bearing. Now, the crazy part? The Itasca reported her signal was the loudest possible, meaning she was literally right on top of them, somewhere in the immediate area. But they couldn't send voice on her requested frequency, so they shot back Morse code. Earhart acknowledged the Morse code but said she couldn't figure out which direction it was coming from. She stated they were flying on a line of position, north to south, on 157 to 337 degrees. And then, just silence. Section 2. The unprecedented search. 80 years of deep-sea operations. The absolute second contact was lost. This story flipped from a pioneering flight into a desperate, frantic rescue mission. $4 million. That is the equivalent of about $90 million today. And that's exactly what the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard spent over the next 2.5 weeks. They scoured the ocean with planes and ships in what became the absolute costliest and most intensive air and sea search in U.S. history up to that point. But despite all that money, all that manpower, nothing. No plane, no life raft, not even an oil slick. And honestly, that trend of incredibly expensive dead ends has just continued straight into the modern era with high-tech deep-sea sonar. David Jordan spent $4.5 million scanning 1,200 square miles northwest of Howland in 2003 and 2006. Result? No wreckage. In 2019, Robert Ballard, the guy who found the Titanic, he led a massive expedition to Nukumoro Island. No evidence. And just recently, in 2024, Tony Romo's deep-sea vision expedition swept the waters around Howland Island all over again. And the result? Still no definitive evidence. The Electra remains completely hidden. Section 3. 3 enduring theories, filling the evidence void. Because we don't have a plane, human nature basically demands an explanation, right? So several theories have rushed in to fill this massive void of physical evidence. We're going to look at these impartially because every single one has cultivated a fiercely dedicated following over the decades. First up is the Gardner Island hypothesis. This posits that Earhart and Noonan couldn't find Howland, realized their fuel was critically low, and just kept flying south along that 157-337 line of position until they crash-landed on a coral atoll now called Nukumoro. And sure, researchers have found historical artifacts on the island over various expeditions, but it's really crucial to note that, just like Robert Ballard's 2019 search showed, no definitive link between Earhart and Nukumoro has ever been proven. Then there's the Japanese capture theory. This hypothesis suggests that Earhart somehow navigated wildly off course, straight into the Imperial Japanese South Seas Mandate, crash-landed, and was taken prisoner by military forces. This theory gained a lot of traction, primarily through unnamed witnesses, including local residents on Saipan and some Japanese troops. It was even firmly believed by some of Earhart's own relatives. And finally, we have the New Britain theory. This one assumes that mid-flight, facing terrible headwinds or maybe mechanical issues, Earhart actually turned the plane entirely around and tried to make it all the way back to an airfield in New Britain, Papua New Guinea, which is 2,200 miles away. This stems from a report by a World War II veteran named Donald Angwin, who claimed to have seen a wrecked aircraft in the jungle there in 1945. However, subsequent searches of that specific jungle area have totally failed to relocate any such wreckage. Now, while these theories are fascinating, let's ground ourselves back in the harsh reality of the era. Despite the allure of survival or capture narratives, the official conclusion of the U.S. government, and frankly the consensus held by most mainstream aviation historians today, is the crash and sink theory. They believe the simplest explanation is the right one. The Electra simply ran out of gas, ditched into the Pacific near Howland Island, and is resting somewhere on the seafloor, anywhere from 17,000 to 18,000 feet down in the dark. Which leaves us with this final question to really ponder. What is Amelia Earhart's ultimate legacy? Today, her name is almost synonymous with unsolved mystery. But should that tragic morning in 1937 overshadow the monumental achievements of her actual life? She was an absolute trailblazer, a brilliant pilot, and a feminist icon who inspired an entire generation of female aviators. As we keep scanning that ocean floor for answers, we absolutely shouldn't lose sight of the stars she reached for. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep exploring.